He learned about my past and now he's leaving without even trying. A week ago, my husband and I were still going to bed in the same room, exchanging lazy goodnights and complaining about mundane stuff like laundry. Now he's barely speaking to me, and I'm looking at my life, our life, shattered on the floor over something I did a decade before we even met. I'm 31, and I've been with my husband, Lucas, for 5 years, married for two. When we first started dating, he made it pretty clear that hearing about my exes irritated him. So I just stopped talking about them. It wasn't that I lied about my history, I just chose not to volunteer details. And honestly, that never seemed like a problem until last weekend. We were out for a friend's birthday, having drinks in a bar. A woman I considered a friend, well, ex friend now, got a little too tipsy and decided to spill that back in college. I used to have threesomes with my boyfriend and his roommate. It happened a dozen or so times, but as far as my husband knows, it was just more than once. I guess that's more than enough to disgust him. College was a blur of partying, hooking up, weekend benders. I was 19, 20, 21. My ex and I tried all kinds of stuff, including those group encounters. That period of my life feels like a different universe. I drank every weekend, dabbled in recreational drugs, flung myself into the party scene like so many others. And I do regret it. Not just the sexual experimentation, but the chaos of it all. It's not something I've ever been proud of, but I never thought it would come back to haunt me a decade later. Lucas found out right there in the bar. One minute we were all tipsy laughing. Next minute, my friend is giggling about how wild I was in college and how she remembers me bragging about two guys at once. I froze, my stomach plummeting. Lucas went dead quiet. We left early and he slept on the couch that night. Then the next night, he slept in the guest room. By the time Wednesday rolled around, he still hadn't said more than a handful of words to me, and none of them indicated forgiveness. I begged him for a conversation, any conversation, so I could explain. But every time I approached him, he'd just shake his head, say he needed time. Meanwhile, I was walking on eggshells in my own home, terrified that any wrong word would push him to file for divorce. I told him everything, that I was a different person in college, that it was over a decade ago, that I hadn't so much as thought about those threesomes in years. I tried to emphasize how I'd grown, how I'm a loyal wife, how none of that was relevant to the woman I am now. But he didn't want to hear it. He just kept looking at me like I was a stranger. When he finally sat me down early one morning, bringing me coffee, my heart soared for a second, thinking maybe we'd talk it out and find a solution. Instead, he told me he felt he'd been conned, that if he'd known about my college exploits, he never would have dated me, let alone married me. He said his view of me is irreparably changed, that he no longer sees me as someone worthy of being his wife. Hearing those words made me feel physically ill, like I was being fired from my own marriage. He also brought up the trust issue, how I'd kept something this big from him, implying I'd intentionally deceived him. It didn't matter that I'd never once claimed to be a saint, or that I'd avoided details because he always got touchy about my exes. All that mattered was in his mind, I was an imposter, a woman with a shady past who tricked him into thinking I was clean. It hit me like a punch in the gut when he confessed he'd already spoken to a lawyer. The process was in motion. He hadn't even given me a chance to defend myself first. He just decided I wasn't good enough, so he'd end it. I asked him, begged him, could we do therapy? Could you give me a chance to prove none of that matters anymore? He shook his head, calm and cold, saying he'd already made up his mind. My husband is a business owner with multiple ventures, and he's always been cutthroat about partnerships if he feels betrayed. I guess I shouldn't be surprised he's applying the same logic to our marriage. Still, I never imagined he'd just walk away. On top of it all, he had me sign a prenup when we got engaged. I'd convinced myself we'd never need it, that this was just his standard business brain wanting everything spelled out. But there it was, in black and white, guaranteeing me almost nothing if we split. He did offer to pay off my remaining student loans, not legally obligated, just kindness, as he put it. But otherwise, he's cutting me off. I told him I'd challenge the prenup in court. He shrugged, said I was free to try. I can't help feeling resentful. I gave him 5 years of my life, the best years. And now he's tossing me aside like a used tissue because I had threesomes in college 10 years before I even knew him. Is that fair? This morning, I woke up in an empty bed again. The house was too quiet. My eyes felt puffy from crying half the night. Lucas wasn't in the guest room. He'd left early, probably to a lawyer or his office. I realize this is actually happening. He's divorcing me, all because of something that happened in my early 20s, something that hasn't touched our marriage at all, except for the fact that he found out. I want to scream that he's overreacting, that he's fragile and close minded. But at the same time, I know I can't force him to see me differently if he's already labeled me unworthy. That word keeps echoing in my head, unworthy. Like my entire identity, my love for him is overshadowed by a wild period of partying and sexual exploration from a decade ago. He's not even furious or calling me degrading names. He's so polite about it, like he's politely firing me from his life. Part of me wishes he'd rage and call me every slur in the book because at least then I'd see his passion. But no, it's like he used up all his emotions deciding we're done, and now he's calmly following through. I can't stop thinking about how we used to talk about kids, travel plans, house renovations. All that is dead now. He's told me in his calm voice that we no longer have a future, that I'm not the person he believed me to be. It's so final, so casual, like flipping a switch. I'm also furious at the ex-friend who outed me. She must have known how Lucas would react. Yet she told him anyway, maybe for drama or out of jealousy. I cut her off, but the damage is done. My husband sees me as damaged good, and I might end up with nothing except my student loans, which he's apparently going to pay off as a final pity gesture. I called my family, and they said I could move back in if I need to, which is humiliating at 31. But if I lose my home and finances because of the prenup, I might not have a choice. The worst part is I still love him deeply, even though he's dropping me without mercy. He didn't even give us a chance. No therapy, no real talk. Just poof, marriage over. I wonder if he'd have cared if I'd had a typical number of sexual partners. Did the idea of a threesome just disgust him that much? I keep replaying it. He no longer sees me as someone worthy of being his wife. That line is hammered into my brain, reminding me I'm losing everything over something I can't change.